Welcome back to another Sunday School Bible class. Today's lesson is entitled The Book of Esther. Before we begin this week's lesson, it is important to remember that the Israelites were eventually called Jews. So when you hear the word Jews, it means Israelites, the seed of Abraham, same thing. While the Jews were still in Persia, there was another king of Persia named Ahasuerus. One day, while this king made a great feast where he and his friends got drunk, he commanded his wife to come to the feast to show off her beauty to his friends. When she refused, he declared her no longer queen and began a process to look for a new queen. There was a beautiful young Jewish virgin named Hadassah, commonly called Esther, whose mother and father had died, and she was taken care of by her older cousin, who was a man named Mordecai. When Mordecai heard the king's decree to look for a new queen, he took his young cousin to the palace so that she would be among those whom the king would choose or could choose. Mordecai told Esther not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. When it was time for the king to choose the new queen, the king chose Esther. One day, Mordecai, while working at the palace, heard some evil men planning to kill the king. Mordecai reported it, and the men were arrested and killed. His deed was recorded in a book. After this, the king promoted an evil man by the name of Haman to a very high position. Haman came from a nation that had attacked the Jews, or Israelites, many years before. The king commanded all the other officials to bow before this man Haman, but Mordecai, being Jewish, would not bow before him. When Haman found out that Mordecai refused to bow to him, he decided that he would get the king to sign a bill or a decree to kill all the Jewish people in the kingdom. The king trusted Haman and signed the decree, not knowing that Esther, his wife and queen, was Jewish. The decree was published throughout the entire empire, and all the Jewish people should be destroyed on a certain date in the coming year. So many of the Jewish people cried and panicked. This decree could not be changed once it was signed, not even by the king himself. When Mordecai saw the decree, he sent word to Esther of the king's plan to kill all the Jews. He asked her to go to the king to plead for the Jewish people. However, under Persian law, if anyone, even the queen, went to the king without being called, they would be put to death unless the king held out his golden scepter to them and gave them permission. Therefore, Esther feared, but Mordecai told her that God had promoted her to that position in order to save his people. So Esther decided to go after fasting 3 days and 3 nights, and requested all the Jews to do the same, but made up in her mind to risk her life for the Jewish people, saying, "If I perish, I perish." Then Esther went to the king's inner court to speak with him, and the king gave her permission and asked her what she wanted. She requested that both the king and Haman come to a special banquet that she would prepare for them. The king accepted for himself and Haman, who then went home, Haman did, and told his wife how proud he was with his promotions. However, he was so angry at Mordecai for refusing to bow to him, he had a gallows built so that he could hang Mordecai. A gallows is a structure used to kill people by hanging. That night the king could not sleep, so he had his officers read him the chronicles, or books, and he learned how Mordecai saved his life and that Mordecai was never rewarded. In the morning, the king asked Haman when he arrived how best to reward someone who had pleased him. Haman thought the king wanted to honor him, so he suggested to dress the honorable person in the king's crown and robes and parade him on the king's horse through the streets and proclaim that the king honored him. Haman never realized that the man was Mordecai and not him. Then the king told Haman to do as he suggested to Mordecai the Jew. So the king honored Mordecai, and Haman himself performed this honor. After this was done, Haman was picked up by the king's officials to attend the banquet that Esther had prepared. The next day at the banquet, the king again asked Esther what her request was. She told the king that she was pleading for her people who were supposed to be killed because they were Jewish, and Haman had tricked the king into signing this decree to have them killed. Haman was very afraid now, and the king became so angry that he went out into the palace garden. While he was out there, Haman stood up to beg the queen to save his life. He tripped and fell on the queen at the very moment the king walked back into the room and saw him. The king, thinking he was trying to hurt the queen, ordered Haman hanged on the very gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai. Since the old decree could not be changed, the king then issued a new decree saying that the Jewish people throughout his kingdom had permission to unite and fight to kill anyone who attacked them. When the day came for the attack on the Jewish people to take place, the Jews were able to withstand and destroy their attackers. The Jews were saved, and they had a great celebration that was remembered every year after that because of Queen Esther's courage. Then the king promoted Mordecai to the highest position in the land, right under the king. Mordecai continued to help all his people, the Jews, and wrote it in a book about how the Jews were saved that time. We see in this story that a man like Haman, who had everything going for him, was so blinded by hate and revenge that he not only could not enjoy what he had, but threw it all away and wound up losing his life as well. We also see that God promoted Mordecai from a lowly official to a man who was second in command to the king, and gave him great influence over the land because of his love for his younger cousin Esther. But the most important point of this story is that God protected his people, the Jewish people, even though they were in a strange land under a pagan king. He would not let anything happen to them. And as he had said to Abraham 1,500 years earlier or so, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And so it is with us. No matter how bad people try to hurt us, if we're God's people, if we are God's children, He will watch over us, and He will take vengeance on us and fight our battles for us. That's one of the benefits you get from being a child of God. See ya next time. Bye-bye.